You've been viewed a few billion times. What do you not know a lot about that if asked about, you don't really have that strong of an opinion or research on those topics?
Physics.
Really?
Quantum physics.
Okay.
No, mathematics.
Mathematics?
No, I'm not particularly smart mathematically. I've had students who were very gifted mathematically.
Wow, piano, I would have thought you would have been a math guy because piano somewhat is a math formula.
No, my math intelligence is pretty average. So, I mean, there's lots of things I don't know much about. I don't know much about economics. Now, I'm not sure anyone knows much about economics, but they might. But as a technical science, I certainly don't know much about it. So there's plenty of room, there's plenty of places where I'm, woefully ignorant. I don't know nearly as much about history as I should. It's quite embarrassing, really. So, and so you see, well, and this is the thing about warfare that's so interesting about because you can attribute it to territoriality. You can attribute it to a war for resources. That's what I would say, wretchedly simple-minded economists presume. People fight over scarce resources. It's like, hey, we're a little bit more sophisticated than that. And first of all, what resources are you talking about? The bloody Inuit had nothing. They lived perfectly well. What did they have? Snow and seal blubber. People can live in unbelievably deprived conditions. And so the idea that there are natural resources that we fight over because there's a shortage of them is a pretty oversimplified view of human beings. So the question is, well, why are there hierarchies? And the answer is, well, there's an answer for animals and there's an answer for humans. It's you have to organize a hierarchy when you're pursuing scarce resources, because otherwise it's just a war. That's the alternative. There's either a hierarchy of access, which is why chickens have a pecking order. The top chickens eat first. Doesn't mean the bottom chickens don't eat, although it does mean that if there's not enough food. And all the chickens accept the pecking order because otherwise they have to fight. You say, well, that's pretty rough on the bottom chickens. And yeah, but not as rough as being pecked to death. Like, it's rough, but it's not as rough as constant battle. So a hierarchy in some no small part is the alternative to Hobbes, to the Hobbesian state of everyone against everyone else. I was studying political science before that, back when I was in Edmonton, and before that I had even thought about going into law. But as I studied political science, I got increasingly disenchanted with the explanations that were being offered to me about motivations for human conflict, especially in the upper years of my undergraduate education. The lower years were pretty good because mostly what I studied was political philosophy and literature, and I found that very helpful. But in the upper years, the contention of the professors was that people primarily engaged in conflict for economic reasons. And that never struck me as a very deep explanation, because it didn't get at the core of the issue, which was, well, okay, people fight about things of material value, but why do they value those things? I mean, it's kind of self-evident if you think about food and shelter and so forth, but generally speaking, especially in the 20th century, it wasn't necessarily about the basics of food and shelter that people were engaging in conflict about. It was something much more subtle than that. Maybe it had more to do with national identity, that kind of thing. And so there was a psychological element missing in the analysis of the human propensity for conflict that, to me, loomed larger and larger. And so I decided, at least in part for that reason, to pursue a graduate degree in psychology and in clinical psychology. It's like, well, why do people fight? Well, maybe they fight sometimes for good reasons, but very, very frequently they fight for bad reasons. And those bad reasons are personal as well as sociocultural and economic. If you were a Nazi prison guard, for example, whatever pathologies you were carrying around in your destructive little soul, whatever element of Cain was deeply embedded in you, had the opportunity to be manifest fully at every moment of your waking existence, right? You had these people who were completely beholden to you, with no rights whatsoever, to whom you could do whatever your evil little heart determined. You think, well, maybe that was a motivation for putting them there to begin with. And all the cover story about, well, we're trying to build the Third Reich and we're trying to stabilize the state and we're trying to do all these good things. Maybe that's just a cover story for the real motivation, which is nothing but what? The construction of death camps that killed 6 million people. How about that? And the obliteration of 120 million people on the planet, and the leaving of Europe in ruins. Maybe that was the motivation. Or are we going to attribute to Hitler the highest possible motives? Say, no, it's an archetypal manifestation of Cain. Now, he's going to put up a front that says, well, I'm your savior. It's like, well, destructive people think that Cain is their savior. So one of the things I try to do in my class, I have this class called Maps of Meaning, which concentrates on atrocity, basically, on Soviet atrocity and Nazi atrocity mostly. And what I try to do in the class is to teach my students that had they been in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, they would have been Nazis. And had they been offered the opportunity to be an Auschwitz camp guard, then maybe they would have leapt at it. And maybe they would have been in the more sadistic proportion of the Auschwitz camp guard population. You think that makes you feel safe? It doesn't make you feel safe to know that Nazis were humans and you happen to be one of them. Look, I told you the story at the beginning of the lecture. I've been trying to solve a problem. And I've really done everything I can to try to solve that problem. And I've been talking about what I learned and who I learned it from for 30 years, you know, and that's had a positive impact, as far as I can tell, on the people to whom I've taught it. And so I'm someone who's tried to solve the hardest problem that he could find. That's all. And yeah. One of the things that's really interesting about psychoanalysis, and one of the things I love about it, is that the psychoanalysts tell you, if someone says, I'm good, or I stand for a good thing, the first thing you want to look for is the opposite of that. It's like, okay, that's what you say. What might really be going on? Or is it actually the case that you're Jesus Christ and all the saints combined? You know, you're this perfect person. Or are there dark motives for what you're doing that you claim to be doing for the good?
That's part of the reason why people with personality disorders can sort of have an uncanny effect on you, which is to say that if you're personality disordered, you have a really potent expectation about how someone else will behave, usually like a son of a bitch, fundamentally. And if someone with a personality disorder encounters someone who doesn't act like that, they're a challenge to their belief system. And people with personality disorders are extremely good at turning everyone they meet into the same person that they already met. And they do that, I think, by exchanging very, very subtle and covert reinforcements, which is to say, you're engaged with me and I have a personality disorder. Every time you act properly, I'll ignore you or say something contemptuous or look away or do something quite subtle. And every time you act like a miserable bastard, which is basically what I expect, I'll at least pay some attention and possibly even reinforce you covertly. And you'll find, if you get close to me, that it's almost like you've been distorted by a gravitational field as your behavior starts getting pulled in these strange directions. And we do that to each other all the time.